The office door closed with a heavy sound that seemed to swallow all other noise in the world. Lia Maren, only 6 years old with scraped knees and tangled brown hair tied with a yellow ribbon, stood in a room where grown men trembled just from breathing the same air. The walls were dark wood that smelled like cigars and old money. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting shadows that moved like living things across the expensive carpet. Around her, guards in black suits touched their weapons nervously, their faces showing shock that quickly turned to alarm. At the massive mahogany desk sat Salvatore Moretti, the man whose name made entire neighborhoods go silent when it was whispered after dark. His dark eyes, cold as winter stones pulled from a frozen river, watched the small child who had somehow walked past every locked door, every armed checkpoint, every layer of security that was supposed to make this place impossible to reach. Lia's tiny fingers, still sticky from the candy she had eaten for breakfast, reached out and grabbed his wrist before anyone could move. She pulled with all her small strength, and impossibly, unbelievably, this man who had never bowed to kings or presidents or police commissioners leaned down toward her. Her whisper cut through the thick air like a blade slicing silk. "My mom cried much because of your men." The room held its breath. Even the clock on the wall seemed afraid to tick. The guards' hands froze on their guns. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because in 30 years of Salvatore Moretti's reign over this city's underworld, nothing like this had ever happened before. Before we continue this incredible journey, drop a comment telling us where you're reading from right now. This story will take you places you never expected. 3 weeks earlier, Lia Maren had been washing dishes in their small apartment on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The sun had just set, painting their tiny kitchen in shades of orange and purple that made everything look almost beautiful, almost magical, almost like the life she wished she could give her daughter. Lia sat at the wobbly table they had bought from a thrift store, coloring a picture of a house with a garden full of flowers, something they could never afford in this crowded, expensive, dangerous city where dreams came to die and only the strong survived. The knocking started suddenly. 3 hard pounds that made the thin walls shake. Eva's hands stilled in the soapy water. Her heart began to race even before her mind understood why. She knew that kind of knocking. She had heard it before, in other apartments, other buildings, other lives that ended badly. It was not a neighbor borrowing sugar, or the mailman delivering packages, or even the landlord demanding rent 3 days early like he sometimes did. Through the peephole, she saw 3 men in expensive coats that cost more than she made in 6 months, of double shifts at the diner. Her stomach turned to ice. She opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain lock in place, that flimsy piece of metal that would not stop anyone but made her feel slightly less terrified. The man in front had slicked back hair that gleamed with too much gel, and a smile that held no warmth, no kindness, nothing human at all. His name was Rico, though Eva did not know this yet, did not know that this man would haunt her nightmares and change her daughter's life forever. Behind him, 2 larger men stood with their hands in their pockets, watching the hallway like wolves watching sheep, their eyes flat and cold. "Lia Maren?" Rico's voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who had done this many times before and enjoyed it. "We need to talk about your brother." Eva's hands began to shake so badly she had to grip the door to keep standing. Her brother Marco had disappeared 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but questions and, apparently, debts she knew nothing about. She had been terrified this day would come, had felt it approaching like a storm she could see building on the horizon, but could not escape. "I don't know where he is," she said, trying desperately to keep her voice steady, trying to sound brave when every part of her wanted to slam the door and hide under the bed like she had done as a child during thunderstorms. "I haven't seen him since last summer. He just left one day and never came back." Rico's smile widened, showing too many teeth, like a shark that had smelled blood in the water. "That's unfortunate for you, Eva. Very unfortunate indeed. Because his debts don't just disappear because he did. Someone has to pay. That's how the world works. Actions have consequences, and when your brother ran away from his consequences, well, they became your consequences instead. He pulled out a paper from his coat, folded carefully, and held it up to the crack in the door. It was covered in numbers that made Eva's vision blur. Numbers so large they did not seem real. $15,000. An impossible amount. More money than she had ever seen in her entire life. She made $9 an hour at the diner plus tips that barely covered their rent and food. $15,000 might as well have been $15 million. You have 2 weeks, Rico said casually, as if discussing the weather or a baseball game or what he had eaten for lunch. 14 days to come up with the money. Or we start taking payment in other ways. His eyes moved past Eva, sliding through the crack in the door, into the apartment, landing on Lia at the table. The little girl had stopped coloring and was watching them with wide, curious brown eyes that looked so much like her father's. The father who had left before she was born. Rico's gaze lingered too long on the child, traveling over her pink shirt and her small hands and her yellow ribbon, and Eva felt something break inside her chest. Some last piece of innocence, or hope, or belief that the world had any goodness left in it. She slammed the door and locked every lock, all 4 of them, her whole body shaking so violently she could barely make her fingers work. Lia came to her mother immediately, her small feet padding across the worn linoleum, wrapping her thin arms around Eva's legs. Mama. Who were those men? Why do you look scared? Eva picked up her daughter, holding her close, pressing her face into Lia's hair, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo and the baby powder she still liked Eva to sprinkle on her after baths. Nobody important, baby. Nobody important at all. Just some people who made a mistake. They won't come back. But even as she said the words, Eva knew they were lies. These men would come back. They always came back. That night, after Lia fell asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one with one eye missing and stuffing coming out of one ear, Eva sat in the dark kitchen and cried. She cried quietly. The way mothers learn to cry, when they cannot let their children hear their fear, stuffing a dish towel in her mouth to muffle the sounds. She cried because she had no money, no family to help, no friends with that kind of cash, and no way to protect the one person who mattered most in the entire world. She cried because she was alone and terrified and had no idea what to do. The men came back 5 days later, and this time, Rico was not smiling at all. His face was hard, angry, impatient. Eva had managed to gather $300 by selling her grandmother's necklace. The only valuable thing she owned. The only thing she had left from her family before everyone died or disappeared or stopped caring. She had taken extra shifts, worked until her feet bled inside her shoes, begged her boss for an advance on her paycheck. $300 felt like a fortune she had climbed a mountain to find. Rico looked at the thin envelope like it was garbage, like she had handed him used tissues or spoiled food. 300? He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the stairwell and made the neighbor's dog start barking. Do you think this is a joke? Do you think I'm running a charity here? $300? When you owe $15,000? One of the large men, the one with a scar across his knuckles and breath that smelled like onions, pushed past Eva into the apartment before she could stop him. She grabbed his arm, desperate, her fingers digging into his jacket, but he shoved her aside like she weighed nothing at all. She fell against the wall, her shoulder hitting the corner hard enough to bring instant tears to her eyes, hard enough that she knew there would be a bruise the size of an apple by tomorrow. Lia was at school, thank God, thank every power in the universe. But the man began looking through their things anyway, opening drawers, checking cabinets, touching their clothes and dishes and private things with his dirty hands. Stop! Eva screamed, finding her voice even though her shoulder throbbed with pain. Please stop. I'll get more, I promise. I'll find a way. Rico grabbed her face with one hand, his fingers digging into her cheeks, forcing her to look directly at him, forcing her to see the cruelty in his eyes. His breath smelled like cigarettes and mint, a combination that made her stomach turn. You have 9 days left, Eva. 9 days to find $14,700. And let me be very clear about what happens if you don't. He released her face and pulled out his phone, showing her a picture. It was Lia. Walking to school that very morning, her pink backpack bouncing, completely unaware someone was photographing her. Your daughter. That pretty little girl with the yellow ribbon in her hair. She walks to school every morning at 8:15, doesn't she? Takes the same route every day. Crosses. At the light by the bakery. Stops to look at the puppies in the pet store window. The threat hung in the air like poison gas, choking her. Eva could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at that picture of her baby girl. And if you go to the police, Rico continued, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. If you tell anyone about this conversation, about this debt, about any of this, we'll know. We always know. And that little girl will disappear just like your brother did. Do you understand me? Eva nodded because her voice had stopped working entirely. The men left, and she collapsed on the floor, sobbing into her hands, her shoulders screaming with pain. Her heart breaking into pieces so small, she thought she might never be able to put it back together. That afternoon, when Lia came home with a drawing she had made in class, a picture of the two of them holding hands under a rainbow, Eva hugged her so tightly the little girl laughed and squirmed. Mama, you're squishing me. I can't breathe. But even through her laughter, Lia noticed things. Children always notice more than adults think they do. She saw the red in her mother's eyes, the puffiness around them, the way Eva's smile did not quite reach her face, the way she kept touching her shoulder and wincing. Mama, are you hurt? Lia asked, her small face serious now, worried. Did you fall down? Eva forced her smile wider, forced cheerfulness into her voice even though it felt like swallowing glass. I just bumped into something at work, baby. I'm clumsy today. But look at your beautiful picture. Should we hang it on the refrigerator? Done. 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 They hung the picture with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. And Eva made dinner. Macaroni from a box, because it was cheap, and Lia loved it, and they ate together while Eva asked about school and pretended everything was normal. But that night, Lia lay in her small bed in the corner of their one-room apartment, separated from her mother's bed by only a thin curtain, listening to her mother cry. The walls were thin in their building. Every sound traveled. The couple upstairs fought every night. The old man next door played his television too loud, and Lia could hear her mother's muffled sobs, could hear her whisper, "I don't know what to do," over and over, like a prayer to a God who was not listening. Lia had heard the men too, 3 days before. She had been in the bathroom, and the door was not closed all the way, and their voices had carried. Deep voices talking about money and threats, and her Uncle Marco, who she barely remembered. She had heard the crash when Mama fell, had peeked out to see her mother on the floor, and a big man going through their kitchen. She was only 6 years old, but she understood enough. Someone was hurting her mother. Someone was making her mother scared. And scared mothers cried at night, when they thought their daughters could not hear them. Lia pulled her stuffed rabbit closer and made a decision. She did not know exactly what she would do, but she knew she had to do something. Tomorrow, she would be brave. She did not know how yet, but she would find a way. Her mother had always told her that brave people were just scared people who did things anyway. So tomorrow, she would be scared and brave at the same time. The next morning, Lia did something she had never done before. Something she knew would get her in trouble, but that felt necessary in a way she could not explain. Instead of going straight to school like she did every single day, she followed a man she had seen in the neighborhood. She had noticed him 2 days ago, standing on the corner near the bodega, smoking a cigarette and watching everything with sharp eyes. He wore a black suit even though it was warm outside, and he had a scar on his neck that looked like someone had tried to cut his throat once. Everyone moved out of his way. When he walked down the street, shop owners nodded to him nervously. Even the teenagers, who usually acted tough, got quiet when he passed. Lia had learned to notice things like that, the way people's faces changed when certain men appeared, the way whole crowds would part, like water flowing around a rock. Her teacher said she was observant, which Lia knew meant she paid attention to things other people missed, so she paid attention now. Following this man from half a block away, hiding behind cars and mailboxes and newspaper stands, moving from shadow to shadow like the spies in the movies she had watched at her friend's house. The man walked 3 blocks, never looking back, never seeming to notice the small girl trailing him like a ghost. He turned onto a street Lia did not recognize, where the buildings were taller and nicer, where everything looked cleaner and more expensive. He walked up to a tall gray building with no sign on the front, just a number in brass above the door. 2 guards stood there, big men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets that Lia somehow knew were guns, even though she had never seen a real gun in her life. The guards nodded to the man with the scarred neck, and he walked inside. Lia watched, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The guards were talking to each other now, laughing about something. Distracted, a delivery man came up carrying boxes, and they held the door open for him. And in that moment, in that brief second, when the door was open and the guards were not looking, Lia slipped inside, behind the delivery man, making herself as small as possible, holding her breath. The building inside was nothing like her apartment building. The lobby was dark and smelled like old wood and tobacco and something else. Something expensive she could not name. The floors were marble that made her sneakers squeak softly. There were paintings on the walls, old paintings of men in fancy clothes looking serious. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, crystal pieces that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the floor. Everything felt important here, heavy with secrets and power. Lia's heart was hammering now, so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. But she kept walking, kept moving like she belonged here, like she had every right to be in this place. She saw an elevator, but she was too small to reach the buttons. There were stairs in the back, behind a door marked with a sign she could not quite read. She pushed through the door and started climbing. The stairs went up, and her legs started to hurt, but she kept going. 4th floor. The man had gone to the 4th floor. She was sure of it. She had counted the windows from outside. At the 4th floor, she pushed through another door and found herself in a hallway with thick carpet that swallowed the sound of her footsteps. The walls here were dark wood like the lobby, and there were more paintings, and everything smelled like cigars. At the end of the hallway was a large door, slightly open, just a crack, and she could hear voices inside. Deep voices, men talking about numbers and names and things she did not understand. She recognized one voice, though. The smooth voice from the man who had hurt her mother, who had showed them the picture of her walking to school, who had made her mama cry. Rico. But there was another voice, too, quieter than the others, more powerful somehow, even though it barely rose above a whisper. When that voice spoke, all the other voices stopped. When that voice asked a question, people rushed to answer. That voice made the air in the hallway feel heavier, made Lia's skin prickle with something she did not have a name for yet. She pushed the door open wider and walked inside, and the room went silent immediately. Like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire world. 8 men stared at her, their faces showing shock, then confusion, then anger that darkened their features, like storm clouds rolling in. Rico stood near a window that looked out over the city, and his mouth fell open so wide she could see his back teeth. The guards, 4 of them positioned around the room like chess pieces, reached for their guns but froze when the man at the desk raised one hand slightly, barely lifting it at all, just a tiny movement that somehow stopped everyone cold. Salvatore Moretti sat in a leather chair that looked like a throne from one of Lia's storybooks. the kind where kings sat when they decided the fate of kingdoms. He was not the biggest man in the room, not the tallest, or the widest, or the most muscular, but he was the center of everything, like a black hole that pulled all light and attention toward it. His suit was perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle anywhere, dark gray like smoke. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, combed back from his face. His hands were folded on the desk in front of him, clean hands with no rings, no jewelry, nothing, except power that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a fire. His face showed no expression at all, which somehow was more frightening than anger or cruelty or anything Lia had seen on Rico's face. This was a face that gave nothing away, revealed nothing, promised nothing. This was the face of someone who had learned long ago not to let the world see what he was thinking or feeling. How did a child get past 4 security checkpoints? His voice was quiet, conversational, the way someone might ask about the weather or the time, but every man in the room flinched like he had shouted. The question hung in the air, and nobody answered. Nobody wanted to admit they had failed this badly, that a 6-year-old girl had walked through their security like it did not exist. Salvatore's eyes fixed on Lia, studying her the way a scientist studies something under a microscope, examining every detail. She should have been terrified. Every instinct bred into humans over thousands of years should have been screaming at her to run, to hide, to get away from this predator who sat so still and watched so carefully. But Lia thought of her mother crying in the dark, thought of the bruise on Mama's shoulder, thought of the picture on Rico's phone, and she walked forward instead. Her small sneakers made no sound on the expensive carpet. She walked right up to the massive desk, so close she had to tilt her head all the way back to see Salvatore's face. So close she could see the tiny scar near his left eye, and the way his jaw was clenched just slightly. One of the guards moved toward her, his hand reaching out to grab her and remove her from this place where children absolutely did not belong. But again, that slight hand gesture from Salvatore stopped him. It was remarkable, really, how much power could be contained in such a small movement. Salvatore had not raised his voice, had not threatened anyone, had barely moved at all. But every person in this room obeyed him instantly and without question. "What is your name?" Salvatore asked, and his voice had not changed at all. Still quiet, still without emotion, still giving away nothing about what he was thinking. Lia swallowed hard, her throat dry, her hands shaking at her sides. "Lia Maren," she said, and she was proud of how steady her voice sounded even though her knees were shaking so badly she thought she might fall down. "And why are you here, Lia Maren?" It was a good question, a fair question, and Lia realized she did not have a good answer. She had followed her instincts, followed the man with the scarred neck, followed the feeling that this building held answers, but she had not planned what she would say or do once she got here. She glanced at Rico, who had gone completely pale, all the color draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes were wide with fear and something else, something that looked like rage mixed with terror. Then she looked back at Salvatore, and something in his eyes, some tiny flicker of curiosity, or perhaps recognition of her courage, made her reach out. She grabbed his wrist with both of her small hands, her fingers barely able to wrap halfway around it, and she pulled. She pulled with all her small strength, with every muscle in her arms and back, and impossibly, unbelievably, this man who ruled the city through fear and power and violence leaned down toward her. His face came close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could see the lines around his mouth, could smell his cologne that smelled like cedar and something else she could not identify. She whispered close to his ear, so close she could feel the warmth of his skin, speaking so only he could hear, making sure these words were just for him. "My mom cried much because of your men, the one by the window. He said bad things and pushed her and made her fall. He hurt her shoulder, and she tried to hide it, but I saw. She cries, every night now, and thinks, I don't hear her. But I do. I hear everything. She cries because she's scared. And she's scared because he said he would hurt me if she doesn't give him money we don't have. $15,000. We don't have that much money. We don't have any money. And she's crying, and I don't know how to make it stop. She released his wrist and stepped back, her whole body trembling now that she had said the words out loud, now that she had made this real. Salvatore straightened slowly, taking his time, and the room seemed to hold its breath. His face remained unreadable. But something had changed in his eyes. They had been cold stones before, frozen and dead, and giving nothing away. Now they burned with something dark and dangerous, like fire trapped under ice. He looked at Rico with those burning eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Men who had survived wars and gang fights, and every kind of violence the city could offer actually took a step back from the intensity of that gaze. Rico, Salvatore said softly, his voice still quiet, still controlled, but now carrying an edge that cut like broken glass. Come here. Rico's legs seemed to have trouble moving. He walked forward, as if approaching his own execution, as if every step took all his courage. His hands were shaking. Sweat had appeared on his forehead. Boss, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. The girl is confused. She doesn't understand. Did you take unauthorized action against someone? Not on my list? Salvatore's voice remained quiet, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than if he had shouted, than if he had raged and thrown things and made threats. This quiet was the quiet before an avalanche, before an earthquake, before everything fell apart. Did you threaten someone without my permission? Did you enter someone's home? Without my knowledge? Did you put your hands on someone who was not part of our world? Rico's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water and left to die on the dock. It was just collecting a debt, boss. Her brother Marco, he owed money to. Did I authorize this debt collection? Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Even the traffic noise from outside seemed to fade away. Rico's face was now gray, the color of old meat, the color of someone who knew they had made a terrible mistake. Her brother owed money to the Rossi family. Boss. Not to us directly, but I thought if we could collect it, we could. You thought, Salvatore interrupted, and those two words carried more contempt than 1,000 insults. You thought you could freelance. You thought you could use my name, my reputation, my protection to squeeze money from a waitress. You thought you could terrorize a woman and child to line your own pockets. Salvatore stood, and although he was not a tall man, not physically imposing in the way his guards were, he seemed to fill the entire room, seemed to expand until there was nothing else. Nobody else. Just him and his terrible, quiet anger. I have 3 rules, he said. And now he was walking around the desk, walking toward Rico, who actually stumbled backward. 3 simple rules that everyone who works for me knows. Rule 1. No civilians unless they choose our world, unless they take our money or make our deals or break our agreements. We do not prey on innocent people just trying to live their lives. Rule 2. No women, no children, never, under any circumstances, for any reason. We are criminals, Rico, not monsters. We break laws, but we do not break souls. Rule 3. Nothing happens in my city without my knowledge and permission. Nothing. Not a drug deal, not a protection payment, not a threat, not a finger laid on anyone. Everything goes through me. Everything gets approved. Everything is controlled. He was close to Rico now, close enough to reach out and touch him. You have broken all 3 of my rules, Rico. All 3. You collected a debt I knew nothing about, from a woman who had nothing to do with her brother's crimes. You threatened a single mother working 2 jobs to feed her child. You showed this woman a picture of her daughter, made her think you would hurt that child. And you did all of this in my name, making me responsible for your stupidity, making people think I am the kind of man who preys on waitresses and children." Rico fell to his knees, actually dropped down on the expensive carpet, his hands clasped together like he was praying. "Boss, please. I was just trying to make some extra money. I have expenses. I have debts of my own. I thought, if I could just—" "Marco Castillo," Salvatore continued, as if Rico had not spoken, as if the man on his knees was already gone, already dead, already nothing but a memory. Disappeared 6 months ago, because he stole from the Rossi family. Not from me. Not from anyone in my organization. He stole casino money, $50,000, and he ran. The Rossis have been looking for him ever since. His sister Eva has absolutely no connection to his crimes. She has not spoken to him in years. She is a waitress at a diner on 5th Street. She makes $9 an hour, plus tips. She lives in a 4th-floor walk-up with her daughter. She has never taken drugs, never committed a crime, never even gotten a parking ticket. And you decided to terrorize her for money that is not even owed to us? He looked down at Rico with something that went beyond disgust, beyond anger, something that looked almost like disappointment. "You have embarrassed me, Rico. You have made me look weak. You have made me look like I cannot control my own people. You have made me look like I prey on the innocent. You have made this little girl brave enough to walk into my office because she thought I was the kind of man who would do what you did. Do you understand what you have done?" Salvatore turned to his second-in-command, a gray-haired man named Vincent, who stood near the door with his arms crossed. Vincent had been with Salvatore for 23 years, had seen everything, survived everything, knew everything about how this world worked. "Rico no longer works for us," Salvatore said, his voice returning to that terrible quiet. "Take everything he has earned in my employ. Every dollar in his accounts, every favor owed to him, every connection he has made through me. Strip it all away. Give him 24 hours to leave the city. If I ever hear his name again, if he ever contacts the Maren family or speaks about this day to anyone, if he even thinks about revenge or retribution or any kind of payback, he will not need to worry about leaving anywhere ever again. Am I clear?" Vincent nodded once, sharp and final. 2 guards stepped forward and grabbed Rico's arms, hauling him to his feet. Rico's face showed pure hatred now, all the honor, fear burning away to leave nothing but rage. He looked at Lia with eyes that promised violence, that swore revenge, that said this was not over. Not by a long shot. "You little bitch," he hissed as they dragged him toward the door. "You have no idea what you've done. You have no idea who you're messing with." Salvatore moved so fast, nobody saw it coming. One moment he was standing still, and the next his hand was around Rico's throat, squeezing just hard enough to cut off the words. "If you ever," Salvatore said, his voice dropping so low it was almost a growl, "speak to or about that child again, in any way, for any reason, I will personally ensure you spend your last hours begging for death. Do you understand me?" Rico nodded frantically, his face turning red, then purple. Salvatore released him, and the guards dragged him away. His shouting faded down the hallway, then disappeared entirely as a door slammed somewhere far away. The room remained frozen for a long moment. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, Salvatore crouched down, slowly, carefully, bringing himself to Lia's eye level. Up close, she could see his eyes were not just dark but a deep brown, like rich soil in a garden, like the earth after rain. There were crow's feet at the corners, lines that suggested he had smiled once, long ago, before the world had made him into this. "You are very brave," he said. And for the first time since she had entered this room, his voice held something other than coldness. There was something in it now. Something that might have been respect or admiration or perhaps just surprise. Brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. Lia's chin lifted slightly, some last spark of defiance or pride giving her courage. My teacher says brave and foolish look the same until you know how the story ends. A smile, tiny and unexpected, and gone almost before it appeared, touched the corner of Salvatore's mouth. It transformed his face for just that second, made him look younger, more human, like someone who had once been a child himself. Your teacher is a very wise person. He stood and walked to his desk, pulled out a piece of paper with a letterhead at the top, and wrote something on it in elegant handwriting that looked like calligraphy. He handed it to Vincent. The Maren family, Eva and Lia. Address is 417 West Oak Street. Apartment 4D. No one touches them. No one speaks to them about business. No one even looks at them wrong. Send word through every channel we have, every crew, every associate, every connection. These two are under my personal protection now. Anyone who bothers them answers to me directly. Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise in a face that usually showed nothing. But he nodded and folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket. Salvatore looked back at Lia, and his face had returned to its usual, unreadable mask. But something in his eyes remained softer than before. Vincent will take you home. Your mother must be very worried by now. School probably called when you did not arrive. Lia wanted to say thank you, wanted to express the gratitude and relief flooding through her, but the words felt too small for what had just happened, too ordinary for this extraordinary moment. Instead, she did something even she did not expect, something that came from instinct and emotion and the simple truth that this man had just saved her and her mother. She walked forward quickly and hugged Salvatore around his legs, wrapping her small arms as far around as they would go, pressing her face against his expensive suit for just a moment. Then she ran to Vincent before anyone could react, before the strangeness of what she had done could sink in. The room remained frozen in shock, long after the little girl left. Guards stared at each other with wide eyes. The man with the scarred neck looked like he had seen a ghost. And Salvatore stood motionless, staring at his hands as if they belonged to a stranger, as if something impossible had just happened that he could not quite process. No one, in 30 years of ruling this city through fear and violence and calculated cruelty, had ever hugged him before. Not once. Not ever. When Lia arrived home in a black car with tinted windows and leather seats that smelled like new car and expensive cologne, Eva nearly fainted. She had been out of her mind with worry for 3 hours, ever since the school called to say Lia had never arrived. She had called the police, called the hospitals, run through the streets looking, asking everyone she saw if they had seen a little girl with brown hair and a yellow ribbon. Now she grabbed her daughter the moment she stepped out of the car, checking her for injuries, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold on. Her breath coming in gasps that were half sobs. Where were you? What happened? Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? Oh God. Baby, I thought I lost you, I thought. Vincent handed Eva an envelope, thick and heavy, and stepped back respectfully. His face was kind, grandfatherly even. Not what she expected from a man who worked for Salvatore Moretti. Inside the envelope was cash, more cash than Eva had ever seen in one place. She counted it with trembling fingers. $15,300. Every penny Rico had taken, plus the $300 she had given him from selling her grandmother's necklace. There was also a note, written in elegant handwriting on expensive paper, with a letterhead she recognized from news reports and whispered neighborhood gossip. The matter has been resolved. You and your daughter are safe. The debt never existed. You owe nothing to anyone. Your daughter reminded me of something important that I had forgotten. S.M. Eva looked at Vincent, her face full of questions she was afraid to ask. Questions about what her daughter had done, where she had gone, what kind of deal had been made. But Vincent was already walking back to the car. He paused at the door and looked back at her, his old eyes warm. Your daughter is remarkable. Mrs. Maren. Protect that courage, but teach her wisdom too. The world needs brave people, but it also needs brave people who live long enough to make a difference. Then he was gone, the black car disappearing around the corner like smoke dissipating in wind. Lia hugged her mother tight, pressing her face against Eva's chest, breathing in the familiar smell of her perfume and the dish soap from the diner. I made the crying stop, Mama. The bad man won't come back. The quiet man promised. Eva held her daughter and cried again. But this time from relief so powerful it felt like drowning, like being pulled under waves of gratitude and terror, and love so intense she thought her heart might burst. She did not understand what had happened. Could not piece together how her 6-year-old daughter had walked into the most dangerous place in the city and walked back out unharmed with more money than Eva had ever seen. But Lia was safe. They were safe. That was all that mattered in this moment. She carried Lia upstairs to their apartment, holding her close like she might disappear if Eva let go even for a second. That night, she cooked Lia's favorite dinner, macaroni and cheese with cut-up hot dogs and frozen peas, and they ate together at their wobbly table while Lia told her about the big building and the quiet man, and how she had been brave like the knights in her storybooks who rescued princesses from dragons. Eva listened, her heart breaking and mending all at once with every word, understanding that her 6-year-old daughter had walked into a lion's den to protect her, had faced down monsters because her mother's tears had been too loud in the night. What kind of world did they live in? She wondered as she watched her daughter eat and smile and act like she had not just done the most dangerous thing imaginable. Where children had to be that brave? What kind of world made babies into warriors? 3 months passed like a gentle dream after a nightmare. The money sat in Eva's drawer for 2 weeks before she could bring herself to touch it, afraid it might disappear or that someone would come demanding it back. But slowly, carefully, she began to use it. She paid their rent 6 months in advance, which made their landlord so happy he actually fixed the leaking sink and the broken window. She bought Lia new clothes that actually fit, not hand-me-downs from the donation bin at church. She bought herself a winter coat that did not have holes in the pockets. She put money aside for emergencies, for the inevitable disasters that came with being poor in an expensive city. And then, something miraculous happened. Eva received a letter one morning, official-looking with a law firm's name embossed on the envelope. Inside was a notification that she had been approved for a small business loan she had never applied for. The terms were impossibly generous, almost unbelievable. 5% interest over 10 years, with the first 6 months payment free. The letter said her application had shown remarkable promise and that the lending committee believed strongly in her business plan. But Eva had never submitted an application or a business plan. She had dreamed about opening a cafe someday, had notebooks full of recipes and sketches and ideas, but she had never done anything about it because dreams were free and reality was expensive. With the letter came another opportunity. This one even more surprising. A property manager called her out of the blue to say that a corner space in a good neighborhood, a space Eva had walked past 1,000 times and thought would be perfect for a cafe, was available for rent at a price that made no sense. The previous tenant had left suddenly, and the owner was motivated to fill it quickly. The rent was half what it should have been, for that location, for that size, for that potential. Eva knew, somewhere deep in her bones, that this was not coincidence. This was not luck. This was protection wearing a different mask, opportunities created by a phone call from someone with enough power to make impossible things happen. She did not question this miracle too closely. Afraid it might disappear if she looked at it too hard. Afraid the universe would realize it had made a mistake and take it all back. She signed the papers, took the loan, rented the space, and threw herself into building the dream she had carried in her heart since she was young. The cafe opened on a bright morning in early spring, when the world smelled like rain and new beginnings. They called it Maren's. Simple and clean, painted in yellow letters on the window. Inside, yellow curtains hung in the windows, letting in sunshine that painted everything gold. The walls were cream-colored, decorated with Lia's drawings in simple frames. There were 10 tables, mismatched chairs Eva had found at thrift stores and painted white, and a long counter with a glass case for pastries. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air from the moment they opened until the moment they closed. Eva baked everything herself, getting up at 4 in the morning to make muffins and croissants and cinnamon rolls that melted in your mouth. Lia helped after school and on weekends, wiping down tables and refilling napkin holders and drawing pictures for customers who asked. The cafe became a neighborhood gathering place, somewhere people came not just for food but for the warm atmosphere. For Eva's kind smile and Lia's infectious laughter, for the sense that this small space held more love than most places twice its size. Customers came steadily, then frequently, then so often that Eva had to hire help. She brought on Maria, a woman from her church who needed work after her husband left, and then James, a college student studying business who loved the smell of fresh bread more than anything. Money came in. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to pay the rent and the loan and the utilities. Enough to save a little each month. Enough to breathe without the constant terror that one unexpected expense would destroy everything. Life felt normal for the first time in years. Normal and safe and almost happy. Lia started second grade and made friends and brought home report cards with good grades and teacher comments saying she was bright and kind and imaginative. Eva dated occasionally, nothing serious, but it was nice to remember she was a woman and not just a mother and business owner. They were building a life, a real life with stability and hope and possibilities. Sometimes Eva would find herself smiling for no reason while she kneaded dough or rang up a customer, smiling because they had survived, because they were thriving, because the nightmare had ended and the dream had begun. But Rico had not forgotten. He had left the city as ordered, taking a bus to Chicago, with nothing but the clothes on his back and rage burning in his chest like acid. He had lost everything because of a 6-year-old child and her interfering mother. The thought consumed him during long nights in cheap motels where the mattresses smelled like cigarettes and the walls were so thin he could hear everything happening in the next room. It consumed him while he worked menial jobs, washing dishes and cleaning offices. Jobs so far beneath him that every moment felt like an insult. It consumed him until there was nothing left inside him but hatred and the need for revenge. He knew returning to the city was suicide. He knew Salvatore's reach was long and his memory longer. But Rico had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind of man. He started planning his revenge carefully, obsessively, thinking through every detail. He could not touch Eva directly, not without bringing Salvatore's wrath down immediately. But Lia, the little girl who had destroyed his life, if he could grab her, if he could take her somewhere far away, if he could make Eva feel the terror and helplessness he had felt, then maybe the burning in his chest would finally stop. He watched from a distance for weeks, taking the bus back to the city and staying in a different cheap motel on the outskirts where nobody asked questions if you paid cash. He wore hats and sunglasses and kept his head down. He learned their new routine, saw the cafe, and the apartment above it, where they now lived. He saw Lia walk to school every morning at 8, saw her walk home every afternoon at 3:30. Sometimes Eva walked with her, but not always. Sometimes Lia walked with friends, but sometimes she walked alone, taking the same route every day like clockwork. Children were creatures of habit, and habits could be exploited. Rico waited for the perfect moment. And it came on a Tuesday in April, when the weather was warm and the trees were blooming, and everything felt safe and beautiful. Eva had a meeting with a supplier that morning, something about a new coffee vendor that required her signature on contracts. Lia walked to school alone, her backpack decorated with butterfly pins bouncing against her back, her yellow ribbon bright in the morning sun. Rico was waiting in a white van he had stolen the night before, parked on a side street near the school. His heart was pounding so hard, he could feel it in his throat. His hands shook on the steering wheel. This was insane. He knew that. Absolutely insane. But the need for revenge had become bigger than reason, bigger than self-preservation, bigger than anything else. When Lia turned the corner onto the quiet street, when she was alone with no other kids around, Rico pulled up beside her. She knew immediately something was wrong. Her mother had taught her well about strangers and vehicles, and never stopping, never getting close, never believing anything they said. But before she could run, Rico jumped out of the van, his hand reaching for her arm. Lia screamed, the sound piercing and desperate, and dropped her backpack. She bit his hand as hard as she could, tasting blood, feeling his skin break under her teeth. Rico cursed and grabbed her anyway, trying to pull her toward the van's open side door. People on the street started shouting. A woman screamed. Someone yelled about calling the police. Rico panicked, his plan falling apart, loosening his grip for just a second, and Lia broke free. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, faster than she had ever run in her life. Her breath burning in her chest, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she heard the van's engine roaring, heard Rico shouting curses. She turned a corner into an alley, hoping to cut through to the next street where the cafe stood, where her mother would be, where safety existed. But the alley was a dead end, blocked by a tall fence and filled with dumpsters and old boxes and nowhere to hide. She was trapped. Lia pressed herself against the brick wall, making herself as small as possible, trying not to sob, trying to be quiet so maybe he would not find her. But she could hear footsteps at the alley entrance, slow and deliberate. The sound of someone who knew their prey had nowhere to go. Rico appeared, blocking the only way out. His face twisted with rage and something else, something wild and broken. He had a knife in his hand now, the blade catching the morning light. Blood dripped from where she had bitten him, staining his shirt. "You ruined my life," he said, walking toward her slowly, savoring the moment, wanting her to feel the fear he had felt. "You and your mother. Do you know what it's like to lose everything? To have nothing? To be nothing? Because of you, I have nothing. I am nothing. And you're going to pay for that. Your mother is going to know what it feels like to lose the most important thing in the world." Lia squeezed her eyes shut, pressing harder against the wall as if she could somehow disappear into the bricks. She thought about her mother, about the cafe with its yellow curtains, about the drawings on the walls and the smell of fresh bread. She thought about all the normal, beautiful things she might never see again. She wished she could tell her mother she loved her one more time. She wished she could say she was sorry for being brave that day 3 months ago. Sorry for thinking she could fix things. Sorry for whatever was about to happen now. Then she heard a sound, a calm voice that cut through her terror like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "That is far enough. Rico." Her eyes opened. At the alley entrance stood Salvatore Moretti, flanked by Vincent and 3 other men in dark suits. Salvatore looked exactly the same as he had 3 months ago. Perfectly calm, still, like a man who had all the time in the world. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no fear, nothing but that terrible quiet control. But his eyes were different. They burned with something dark and final and absolutely unforgiving. Rico spun around so fast he nearly fell, the knife shaking in his hand, his whole body trembling. "Boss, I was just... You don't understand. You were told to leave the city," Salvatore said, his voice that same terrible quiet that was somehow worse than screaming, worse than threats, worse than anything. "You were told never to return. You were told the Maren family was under my protection. These were not suggestions, Rico. They were not requests, or recommendations, or friendly advice. They were commands. Direct commands from me to you. And you ignored them." Rico's face showed desperation now, all the rage crumbling to reveal the fear underneath. "They destroyed me. I deserved compensation. I deserved You deserved exactly what you received. Salvatore interrupted, taking a step forward into the alley. The other men stayed at the entrance, blocking any escape. But they did not need to move. There was nowhere for Rico to go. You broke my rules. You preyed on innocence. You used my name to terrorize a woman and child. You embarrassed me, made me look weak, made me look like the kind of man who cannot control his own people. And I gave you mercy anyway. I let you leave with your life when I should have ended it that day in my office. Because this little girl, this brave child, she hugged me and reminded me that sometimes mercy is more powerful than violence. I wanted to be better than I was. I wanted to believe that mercy was not weakness. He was closer now. Close enough that Rico pressed back against the dumpster, trapped between Salvatore and Lia. But you returned my mercy with this. You came back to my city, broke into my peace, and tried to hurt someone under my build. Personal protection. You tried to hurt a child, Rico, a 6-year-old girl, whose only crime was being brave enough to save her mother. Salvatore's voice dropped even lower, became something that barely qualified as sound. I do not give second chances. Rico, I never have. But I gave you one because I was trying to be better than my father was, better than the man I used to be. And you showed me that some people do not deserve mercy. Some people only understand one language. Vincent moved past Salvatore and plucked the knife from Rico's hand as easily as taking a toy from a child. Rico seemed to deflate, all his rage and hatred turning into pure, liquid fear. Please, boss, I'll leave right now. I'll go anywhere. You'll never hear from me again. I swear on my mother's grave. You are correct, Salvatore said softly. I will never hear from you again. Neither will anyone else in this city. Neither will the Maren family. You will disappear as completely as Marco Castillo disappeared, except nobody will look for you because nobody cares. He nodded to Vincent, who grabbed Rico's arm with an iron grip. 2 other men stepped forward, taking Rico's other arm, lifting him off his feet. Rico's pleading turned into screaming, desperate and terrified. The sound of someone who finally understood that some mistakes cannot be unmade, some debts cannot be unpaid. No, please. Boss, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this. Please. But his screaming faded as they dragged him away, out of the alley, into a car that had appeared silently at the entrance. The door slammed, cutting off the sound completely. And then the car was gone, disappearing into the city like it had never existed at all. The alley went silent, except for Lia's quiet sobbing. Salvatore walked to where she still pressed against the wall, her whole body shaking so violently she looked like she might fall apart. He crouched down slowly, carefully, bringing himself to her eye level like he had done 3 months ago in his office. This time, his face was not unreadable. It showed concern, real and genuine, and perhaps even a kind of sadness that went deeper than this moment. Are you hurt? Are you hurt? He asked gently, his voice completely different now, soft and careful, the voice of someone speaking to a frightened animal. Lia shook her head, unable to speak, her throat closed with fear and relief and too many emotions to name. Did he touch you? She shook her head again. Good. That is very good. Salvatore pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, perfectly pressed and white, and carefully wiped the tears from her face. His hands were gentle, surprising from someone who had just condemned a man to disappear forever. You were very brave today, Lia. Again. Still. Always brave. But you should not have to be brave like this. You should be worrying about spelling tests and playground games. Not men like him. Not any of this. He stood and held out his hand. Come. Your mother is probably terrified by now. The school will have called when you did not arrive. Let us get you home where you belong. Lia took his hand, and they walked out of the alley together. Her small hand disappeared completely in his larger one, but his grip was careful, gentle, protective. On the street, people stared, but said nothing. They stepped aside, making a path, their faces showing recognition and fear, and something that might have been respect. Nobody questioned Salvatore Moretti about anything, especially not when he was walking with a crying child. Eva saw them coming from the cafe window, where she had been standing for 20 minutes, staring out at the street. Her phone in her hand, with 911 already dialed, just waiting to press call. The school had phoned 15 minutes ago saying Lia never arrived. Security cameras on the route showed a man trying to grab her, showed her running. Police were already looking. And now, here came Salvatore Moretti, the most dangerous man in the city, walking down the sidewalk holding her daughter's hand. Eva ran outside so fast she knocked over a chair, sending it clattering across the cafe floor. She grabbed Lia, dropping to her knees on the sidewalk, pulling her daughter into her arms, checking frantically for injuries, for blood, for anything wrong. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold on, and tears were already streaming down her face. What happened? Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? Oh God, baby, are you okay? Lia wrapped her arms around her mother's neck and sobbed, finally letting out all the fear she had been holding in, finally safe enough to fall apart. Salvatore stood back, giving them space, his hands in his pockets. Vincent appeared beside him, silent as always, and they waited, while mother and daughter clung to each other on the sidewalk. Finally, Eva looked up at Salvatore, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. What happened? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Rico returned, Salvatore said simply. He broke his agreement to stay away. He tried to take your daughter. He will not be returning again. Ever. Understanding dawned on Eva's face, and she did not know whether to feel grateful or horrified or both. The problem has been permanently resolved, Salvatore said, his voice firm but not unkind. There will be no trial, no police involvement, no questions that might make your life complicated. The man who threatened your family has been removed from existence. That is all you need to know. Eva stood slowly, still holding Lia, and looked at Salvatore with an expression that held 1,000 questions. How can I ever thank you? How can I ever repay this? You owe me nothing, Salvatore said, and there was something in his voice now. Something almost like regret. Your daughter reminded me 3 months ago of something important, something I had forgotten after too many years in this world. She reminded me that courage does not need to be loud or violent or cruel. Sometimes, the bravest people are the smallest ones. Sometimes courage looks like a 6-year-old girl who is willing to face monsters for her mother. Sometimes mercy is more powerful than fear. He turned to leave, but Lia's voice stopped him, small and trembling but clear. Mr. Moretti? He looked back, and his face softened in a way Eva had never seen before, in a way that made him look almost vulnerable. Yes, little one? Will the bad dreams stop now? Lia asked, her face pressed against her mother's shoulder but her eyes on him. Will Mama stop being scared? Something in Salvatore's expression cracked, just for a moment, showing something human and wounded underneath all the armor he wore. Yes, Lia. The bad dreams will stop. I promise you. No one will ever threaten you or your mother again. You have my word. And I do not break my word. And then, he was gone, disappearing into the black car that had been waiting at the curb, driving away like smoke dissipating in wind. Eva held Lia close and carried her inside, where everything was warm and safe and smelled like bread and coffee and home. She closed the cafe for the rest of the day, hung a sign that said, "Family Emergency" on the door, and took Lia upstairs to their apartment. They spent the afternoon on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching Lia's favorite movies and eating ice cream directly from the container. Eva did not let go of her daughter for hours. as if holding her tight enough could make up for those terrifying minutes when she thought she might lose her forever. That night, Eva tucked Lia into bed in her small room, decorated with drawings and butterfly posters, and she sang her all the lullabies she could remember from her own childhood. Lia fell asleep with a small smile on her face, holding her stuffed rabbit close, the yellow ribbon from her hair lying on the nightstand beside her bed. Eva sat in the chair next to the bed for a long time, just watching her daughter breathe, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the small sounds she made in her sleep. She thought about everything that had happened, about the impossible journey from that first knock on their old apartment door to this moment. She thought about the man who had saved them twice now. The man whose name made people afraid but who had shown them nothing but unexpected mercy. What kind of man was he? Really, was he a monster who had done one good thing, or a good man who had been forced to become a monster? Did it even matter? All that mattered was that her daughter was safe, that they were building a life worth living, that the nightmares were finally over. 6 months later, on a cold November evening when the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, Eva was closing the cafe for the night. Business had with 39. I've been good that day. Steady customers and several large orders for Thanksgiving pies. She was counting the register, humming quietly to herself, when she noticed something on the floor near the door, an envelope, plain and white, that definitely had not been there an hour ago. Her heart began to race as she picked it up, though she did not know why. Inside was a single ribbon, yellow like the curtains in her cafe, yellow like the ribbon Lia had worn that first day she walked into Salvatore's office. It was tied in a perfect bow, the silk still smooth and bright. With it was a note, written in that same elegant handwriting she had seen twice before, on expensive paper with no letterhead this time. For the girl who reminded me that courage does not need to be loud. The ribbon from her hair that day. I kept half. She should have the other half. So she always remembers that protection does not always wear armor, and sometimes the strongest walls are the ones you cannot see. Tell her that sometimes even difficult men keep their promises. S.M. Eva's hands trembled as she held the ribbon up to the light. She remembered that day so clearly, 6 months ago when Lia had come home after vanishing from school, when Eva's world had stopped completely. Lia had been wearing a yellow ribbon in her hair that morning, and later that night, Eva had found it on the floor of Lia's room, torn in half down the middle. She had kept one piece in a box by her bed, a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything, how terrifyingly brave her daughter had been. And now, she understood, Salvatore had kept the other half all this time. This feared man, this person who ruled through power and intimidation and violence, had kept a torn ribbon from a child's hair for 6 months as a promise, as a reminder to himself of something he chose to protect, as proof that even he could keep his word. Eva walked upstairs to their apartment above the cafe, her footsteps soft on the wooden stairs. Lia was doing homework at the kitchen table, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration as she worked on math problems about fractions and decimals. She had grown in the past 6 months, gotten taller, lost another tooth, started reading chapter books that had no pictures at all, but she was still the same brave girl. Still had that same fierce determination when she set her mind to something. Eva sat down beside her and showed her the ribbon, holding it out in her palm. Look what someone left for you at the cafe. Lia's eyes widened, and without a word she got up and ran to Eva's room. She returned a moment later, carrying the small wooden box where Eva kept precious things. From inside it, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, she pulled out the other half of the torn ribbon. The piece Eva had found 6 months ago, and saved, without really knowing why. Lia held the two pieces together, and they matched perfectly, the tear line fitting together like a puzzle. The ribbon could be whole again. Lia held them in her small hands, turning them over, examining them carefully. Then a smile spread across her face, bright and genuine, and full of understanding beyond her years. "He kept his promise," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. "The quiet man. Mr. Moretti. He said we would be safe forever. And he meant it. He kept part of my ribbon to remember." Eva pulled her daughter into her arms, and they sat there together at the kitchen table, as evening turned to night outside their window. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, making everything look clean and new and possible. In a city where danger lurked on every corner, where power was built on fear and money and violence, where the strong preyed on the weak and the innocent suffered, one little girl had reminded one powerful man that some things mattered more than all of that. And he had listened. He had changed his path, if only by one small degree, because a 6-year-old had been brave enough to walk into his office and tell him the truth that nobody else dared to speak. 3 more years passed, and they were good years, quiet years, normal years in the best possible way. The cafe grew into a beloved neighborhood institution. Eva hired 3 more employees and was able to breathe without the constant weight of fear pressing on her chest. She started dating a teacher named Michael who made her laugh and treated Lia like she was his own daughter. Lia grew taller, lost all her baby teeth, learned to ride a bike without training wheels. She still had the 2 pieces of yellow ribbon, kept safe in a special box that also held her favorite drawings, dried flowers from her 9th birthday, ticket stubs from movies, and all the small treasures children collect. She did not talk about that day very often, but sometimes, when she walked past the gray building with no sign on it, she would remember, and she would stand a little taller, walk a little braver, carry herself with the confidence of someone who knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Salvatore changed too, in ways that surprised even those who had known him for decades. He became known for different rules, harder lines about who his organization would and would not touch. Civilians were completely off limits now, not just in theory but in practice, with swift and terrible consequences for anyone who broke this rule. Women and children received special protection in his territory, safe from the kinds of predators who used to operate freely. Some in the criminal world said he had gone soft, lost his edge, become weak. Others, the smarter ones, said he had finally become what a real leader should be, someone who understood that true power did not come from making people afraid, but from making them believe in something bigger than themselves. He never spoke about why the changes happened, never explained his new philosophy, or justified his decisions. But Vincent knew. Vincent had seen the little girl hug Salvatore's legs that day in the office, had watched his boss stand frozen afterward, as if a bomb had gone off inside him and rearranged everything. Vincent had seen him keep half of a torn yellow ribbon in his desk drawer, taking it out sometimes when he thought nobody was watching, holding it like a talisman, or a reminder, or a promise made to someone who still believed promises meant something. On Lia's 9th birthday, a package arrived at the cafe just after opening time. The delivery man said it had been sitting at the shipping center for a week, with instructions to deliver it on this exact date. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with string, with no return address anywhere on it. Inside was a book, a beautiful leather-bound collection of fairy tales about brave knights and clever princesses and dragons who learned to protect instead of destroy. The illustrations were gorgeous, hand-painted, watercolors that looked like they belonged in a museum. On the first page, written in that same elegant handwriting, Eva and Lia both recognized now, was a message that made Eva's throat tighten with emotion. For the girl who taught a dragon that even dragons can choose to protect instead of destroy. May you always be brave, but never have to be as brave as you were that day. May you grow up in a world where courage is rewarded and innocence is protected. May you never forget that sometimes the smallest people cast the largest shadows. Happy birthday. S.M. Underneath the message was a small pressed flower, perfectly preserved, yellow like her curtains, like her ribbon, like sunshine breaking through dark clouds. Eva watched Lia read the message over and over, her small finger tracing the elegant letters, her lips moving silently as she sounded out the harder words. "Mama," Lia said softly, looking up with those wise brown eyes that seemed too old for her face sometimes. "Do you think people can really change? Like in the stories, when the beast becomes a prince? Do you think bad people can become good?" Eva thought about the envelope of money that had saved them all those years ago, the cafe that had given them a life worth living, the 3 years of safety in a city that was not safe for most people, the torn ribbon that proved promises could be kept by the most unlikely people, the book that had arrived exactly on time with a message that showed someone had been paying attention, someone had remembered, someone had cared. "I think," she said carefully, choosing her words with the weight they deserved, "that people can choose to be better. Not perfect, never perfect. Because nobody is perfect, but better than they were yesterday. Better than they were forced to become. And sometimes, that choice to be better, that is the bravest thing anyone can do. Braver than fighting dragons or climbing mountains or any of the things in storybooks." That night, they had a party at the cafe after closing time. Eva and Lia made cupcakes together. Chocolate with pink frosting and sprinkles that got everywhere. They invited the neighbors and Lia's friends from school and the regular customers who had become like family. The small space filled with laughter and music and the warm glow of birthday candles. Lia made a wish before blowing them out, closing her eyes tight and concentrating with that same fierce determination she brought to everything. Eva wondered what she wished for but did not ask, because birthday wishes were private magic that should not be spoken out loud. Through the window, if you had been watching carefully from the street below, you might have seen a black car parked half a block away, staying just long enough to ensure the party was safe and happy and unthreatened. You might have seen a man in the back seat holding a small piece of yellow ribbon, turning it over in his hands like a prayer bead or a lucky charm. And you might have seen him smile, just slightly. A real smile that softened his features and made him look almost peaceful, before the car drove away into the night. The world kept turning after that, the way it always does, indifferent to individual stories of courage and redemption. The city kept breathing with all its danger and beauty and impossible moments. But in a small cafe with yellow curtains on a corner where the morning light came in just right, a mother and daughter had built something that could not be destroyed by fear or power or violence. They had built a life filled with morning bread and homework help and birthday cupcakes. They had built a future where bad dreams stopped and good dreams began. And somewhere in the shadows of that same city, moving through it like a ghost with power, a man who had forgotten how to be human had remembered because of a 6-year-old girl who grabbed his wrist and whispered the truth nobody else dared to speak. He protected them still, would protect them always. Not because he owed them anything, but because protecting them had become part of who he was now. Part of the better version of himself he was trying to become. Sometimes the bravest warriors are the smallest ones who fight with nothing but words and honesty. Sometimes the fiercest protectors are the ones nobody sees, working in shadows to keep the light safe. And sometimes, just sometimes, a torn ribbon kept in 2 separate places can hold more power than all the weapons in the world. More meaning than all the money, more truth than all the lies people tell themselves about who they are and who they can become. This story reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet whisper from a child who won't watch her mother cry, or a powerful man choosing mercy over reputation. Sometimes it's a torn ribbon kept in 2 places for years, connecting lives that shouldn't have met, proving kindness can bloom even in the darkest places. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own courage. Comment your own brave moments, where you're watching from, and how this story made you feel. Like, subscribe, and share, because even the smallest acts of kindness and courage can change the world. Be brave, be kind, and remember, small actions can cast the largest shadows.